IVM.
Hello everybody, welcome to episode 92 of Shunya 1. We're going to be talking to Pratyush Prasanna. He is the India head for Poynt. Poynt's a smart terminal and they have some really interesting features, and we have a great conversation talking about what is the future of smart terminals and how they're going to be used in a variety of different ways as we go forward. Last week we had an interesting question on the Slack channel. Akansha Hazari was our guest and she's the founder of Empani, which is a local commerce platform. We asked our channel the question, what's more likely to succeed in the local commerce space? A large number of small merchants or large organizations like Flipkart or Amazon taking over? And the answer is an overwhelming number of you think that a large number of small merchants are going to be taking over the local commerce space. And I think that is probably what I would have thought as well. And I think that we're all in agreement. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Pratyush Prasanna, and we'll be back right after this break. So, Shiladitya, where have you been traveling this week?
Hey, I just got back from Bangalore, one of my usual stops.
How was your trip over there? What kind of driving experience did you?
I took a whole day cab, which is from what I usually do.
Was it Savari?
No, it wasn't. I haven't actually checked them out. I know you use them a lot.
Yeah, I use them a lot. They're a really, really useful platform. At least I think it works really well. The idea of having great professional drivers who are going to come to you wherever you need them to. It just, to me, that plus, the fact that they know their roads, the fact that it's transparent, pricing is transparent. I kind of really appreciate all that stuff.
All right, I'm going to definitely check it out. But we have something for our listeners.
Yes, we do. We do. If you're listening to this and if you'd like to check out Savari, use the code IVM Travel. That's IVMTRAVEL. And you get $250 off with using this coupon code, and an additional 300 rupees off will come if you pay with Amazon Pay. So that's a total of $550 off on a trip, and that I think is fairly significant.
That's actually going to help me out. I'm going to try this out myself on my next trip, which is very soon.
Awesome. So just guys, remember, it's Savari, SAVAARI.com. You can get them on their website. They have an app and they have a call center as well. So if you want, you can call them up and book a car through the phone the old-fashioned way.
All right, here we are. My guest today is Pratyush Prasanna. How are you doing, man? Finally, we have you in our awesome Mumbai city.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for the weather as well. It's hot and sweltering after Bangalore. But thank you for having me here.
Of course, we finally caught you. I know we've been talking about doing a podcast episode, your first podcast.
Yes.
Even though you are a man who is everywhere, on panels, on
actually
platforms.
Mostly on flights. But yes.
On flights, like most of the time, most people in this in the world of entrepreneurship, of course. But you have a fun story behind you. You've been a part of some very interesting companies at different stages of the startup scene in India. Why don't you give us a quick background and then come to, of course, what you are building today?
Sure. So let me start maybe in reverse chronological order. Right now I head Asia for a company called Poynt. Right. Poynt is a smart terminal company, a smart payment terminal company. So if you go and see payment terminals where you swipe your card, they're still very old-fashioned, look like Nokia phones of old. We make smart terminals. We are actually the first smart terminal company in the world.
Right.
This is a company started by Osama Bedier. Osama was the head of Google Wallet. So he started about 5 years ago. And since there are multiple companies who are pretty much Android terminals, but we take the approach of being the smart payment OS platform. Based out of Palo Alto, primarily businesses in the US, Canada, and Europe. I head Asia for Poynt.
Awesome. And I'm going to come back and talk about what you really mean by smart terminal, because that's amongst all the other buzzwords we hear, it's one of the lesser heard ones, from food tech to fintech to smart terminal. So we'll come back on that. But I know you for a while now. And again, going back to what led to you taking up this role, what about the experience you've had before, if you could share a light on that?
Yeah. So before I joined Poynt, I used to work with a company called Paytm.
Of course.
I used to head most of the new products for Paytm, set up the Bangalore center for them. When I joined Paytm, we had approximately 2 odd million users. When I left Paytm, we had about 40. So was a part of the phenomenal growth that happened, and got a chance to work with Vijay as well.
Right.
Obviously saw a lot of the breakneck kind of growth in Paytm, along with acceptance at many different points, starting from, like, you see Paytm everywhere today. There was a signboard downstairs about the payments bank.
Right.
So was a part of that journey, and I think was one of the most treasured experiences that I have. The way that I came into Paytm was when they acquired a company that I had started called Plus Text, which was a local language text messenger. The idea was that when people buy, they would like to bargain in India. There was no mechanism to do that on typical e-commerce sites is where you go and see, hey, this is 25 rupees, you pay 25 and then take it. But the idea was, how do you do that bargain? Mm-hmm. So Plus Text powered that bargain. So when Paytm Mall came out in its first version, bargain was one of the features that we had powered.
Oh, yes.
So that was the intent behind the acquisition. Post that, set up the Bangalore office, set up most of the new products for Paytm, and then left after a few years.
Right. In this whole, in your stint with obviously Paytm and Plus Text, which you of course built, right? And you saw this meteoric sort of growth. Mm-hmm. What did that teach you about the payments landscape per se of our country? Because when you said 2 million users, it's not small. It's comparatively small from today, but it was still early years, I would say, right? It's still early years of Paytm trying to break out into the payment scene in India and sort of defining it as it grew. Mm-hmm. What did you see as the most, did you see this was going to be such a breakout success? Did you see that the payments landscape itself is so ripe for disruption now that you're doing something else in payments? Mm-hmm. What was your impression back then and to what it is now?
Actually, that's an interesting question, because when we started off at Paytm, the thought was that most of the world will follow the China model, which is QR code-based payments will be pervasive everywhere. Mm-hmm. I definitely believed in that, right? However, 3 years or 4 years forward, that has actually not happened. Even in spite of measures like the demonetization that happened and people being forced to go off cash, India has not reverted to a purely QR code based play. Right. We are pretty much back to almost the same levels of cash, although the new forms of payment have got acceptance. You see Paytm and other UPI and Bharat QR and others accepted, right? My views have been tempered and maybe matured by some of these experiences. I personally believe that the next wave of payments worldwide are going to be defined by India. And there are a few reasons for that. The first reason is that we don't have a duopoly like exists in China, which is WeChat versus Alipay. We don't have that. We have Paytm, which is really big, and maybe Bharat QR, which is kind of as a acceptance. But people don't use it as pervasively as they use it in China.
Right.
The second is that we don't have system which spoon feeds people into doing types of payments. Right? We have
WeChat type thing, you mean?
Yeah, we did have a government mandate during demonetization, but that is not going to be ever done again. We have people
Hopefully.
In retrospect, yes. But, by the way, when demonetization happened, I thought that was a good move, apart from the fact that I had Paytm stocks, but I thought that was a good move.
Okay.
I
would heartily disagree, but let's move on.
At that time. Right. But I don't think it's a good move now in retrospect. But, coming back to my original point, which is that we have multiple forms of payment. We have cash, which is, again, very widely used. We have debit cards, which are great to use because of the lower MDR. People, get debit cards along with savings accounts. We have credit cards, which are a very small percentage of, let's say, the potential people who could get credit cards. And we have all these multiple other forms of payment, which are highly efficient. Efficient in the sense the cost of transaction is low. So I personally think that we are in a very nice stage where there is no government interference in terms of forcing people in one way. There is no real big kind of, split in terms of WeChat or Alipay. And we have almost a free market where the market will decide which way it will go. So I think it's going to be interesting.
And it's a good place to be.
It is a good place to be. Also led by several measures. Like, for example, things like Jan Dhan and Aadhaar and GST have made people move to the formal economy in some way or the other. People still do black, but it's still going to, the general movement is towards a formal economy, right? So the trackability, data about people, how they use their money, GST compliance, all that is also going to drive people more and more towards registering, paying their taxes, etc. So that's why it's going to be very interesting in terms of payments. there is also the other part which segues into maybe a bit about what I do today, which is, as a country, it's very difficult to make money if you are on the issuing side here, especially in debit cards.
Yeah.
Right? So that's why I personally think credit cards is going to increase the usage of credit cards. But also at the same time, alternate avenues of monetizing at the merchant's POS, maybe it's a plug for Poynt, but is going to increase.
So plug away, right? I mean, like what kind of avenues do you mean?
Yeah. So traditionally, maybe let me kind of step back a bit, right?
Okay.
If you see in the 1900s, right, about 4 companies in the top 10 companies in the US were railroad companies.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, by 1940s, there was 0. I think the reason why that happened, and I was talking to somebody else about the same thing, is that they considered themselves as railroad companies. They did not consider themselves as transport companies, right? That is where I think the churn in payment companies will happen, because most payment companies have focused on getting a percentage of the transaction and being happy with it. I don't think that's a viable business model worldwide any longer. Again, that's where India will lead, because the efficiency of capital or money in India is very high. Which means the cost of taking 100 rupees from a customer is actually very low for the merchant, which is great, which is efficient. But how do you make money? How do all players in the whole aspect make money? The way you make money is primarily through the data that flows through the system. For example, Square has shown how you have the merchant have the MDR, have some sort of a flat fee for transaction, but you can give working capital loans to the merchants. You can monetize by selling him great apps which work on the same terminal where the transaction is happening. Today, for example, the dumb transaction knows that you had food and you have to pay 530 rupees. It does not know that you had 2 Diet Cokes, 2 beers, butter chicken, whatever, right? If you link those two, it's very, very powerful data which can show a lot about that particular user. And of course, at a very high level, you can track and make sure that you know a lot about the profiling. Why don't you suggest, like whenever you walk to another restaurant, that hey, have a Diet Coke versus we are not out or out of Diet Cokes, or when you're shopping next time. So that's one way of monetizing it.
And use the payment data to do more, basically, is what you're saying. Like payment per se is not what.
Payment per se is going to be the platform.
Right.
But you're not going to make money out of it. The way we'll make money is great experiences for merchants, make alternate uses of data which has not been hitherto done. And the third is how do you platformize at a certain level where you allow others to build components. For example, you could not even envisage companies like, let's say, Zynga or let us say WhatsApp on a smartphone, on a dumb phone. Right? A smartphone allowed billion-dollar companies to be built because they provided that whole platform. Right? So I don't think I can envisage a lot of those companies being built on what smart payment platforms ours and others will bring to the table. But there will be companies built which will monetize that as well.
Right. And that brings me to the question I had earlier about what you mean by a smart terminal, right? Like, why is it that now, after so much evolution in payments and innovation in payments has been done, you think that this platform, the point of sale terminal itself, is something which is being disrupted and it's becoming a platform? Like, why this? Why now?
Yeah, a few industry changes have made it possible. One is, of course, that we have better devices which can handle the software that can run on it.
Right.
Same as phones, and phones actually drove down the prices because the components are essentially the same. Right. The second is, from a regulatory angle, some of the changes that have been made have allowed these transactions to also happen. At the back end, it's almost all the same because we, in a smart terminal and dumb terminal, actually access the same kind of back end. But how you store, how you exchange the data, how you use it, are something that have been, like banks have been opening up to, PCI has been opening up to, etc.
Right.
And the third is that the price point for merchants has decreased consistently. And they are realizing that there can be additional benefits of using smarter devices, same way as we realize, like even today, everyone has a smartphone.
Upgrading your phone is worth it, basically.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, 5 years ago, if you told people, hey, what is the smartphone market in India, they would be like 20%. Today, I think 80% people have smartphones, right? So it's, it's like that last straw on the camel's back has been, or is going to be put, where suddenly that shift will happen so fast that the game itself will change.
Right. And now every terminal will either be smart or not, and if it's not, then it will lack so much more capability. So what kind of capability do you bring to the platform? What specifically, talking about Poynt, you mentioned Square, again, a company which is obviously not in India, but worldwide. They've started something, and now Poynt exists, and now I'm guessing a few other platforms like this also exist worldwide. What is the success such things have seen, given that these are more mature markets which are early adopters of such tech,
right?
And now that it's coming to India, what do you think it will do? So if you could give us a few examples.
Sure. So smart terminals bring a couple of advantages. One, of course, is that it looks better, it's sexier, etc.
But let me faster.
Definitely faster.
Yeah, because these things take forever.
Absolutely. Definitely faster.
Okay.
The other big advantage, actually, which people don't talk about, is that it accepts all kinds of payments. Today, if you see, QR code, you scan like a code. NFC, there is one device which has NFC, right?
Right.
You could probably even do Paytm.
Everything on one device. So it's kind of...
Most people they have a separate machine for Amex.
Yeah.
Right, separate machine for Amex. So this, one terminal, not only ours, every smart terminal accepts all payments, right? But the reason why Poynt is slightly different, or is actually fundamentally different, is that, in terms of analogies, Square is very much like iOS or a Mac, right? Or the erstwhile Mac, where OS is theirs, hardware is theirs, apps are theirs. So it's kind of closed.
Right.
So if you are a merchant, go ahead, use it. It's really cool looking, but,
you have to use all their services.
Yeah, Hotel California, right?
Yeah.
So once you get in, our approach is very much like Android's. Google is one of our investors, maybe that, and Osama used to work with Google, so maybe that philosophy is extended here. But the idea is that we form the payment OS. We ensure that all transactions are secure, happen in a manner which is consistent with banks and authorities and, PCI, etc. worldwide. We use what is legally allowed in that geography for data. And we provide you a consistent platform across everywhere in the world to build apps on top. Our fundamental difference with other smart terminals or so-called smart or Android terminals is that in our case, the way that we have architected it, you build apps on top of our terminal. You don't have to get it certified for every Delta or newer apps. Right?
Okay.
So which means you build it once, get it certified on our app store through us, and it functions as well as in India or in Philippines or in the US for all you care. So that's why it's a platform as such. We also don't call ourselves an Android OS only or Android payment OS. We call ourselves an Android plus cloud OS, which means we actually have a lot of data, legally allowed data about transactions. You can't do a transaction without sharing the data with a bank. So we use the bank's infrastructure in order to give the same data back to the merchant to showcase, hey, these are the transactions that you did in this day. These are, your peak is at 2 p.m. and at 6 p.m. because you're a restaurant.
Right.
Whereas, you're a handbag store, so it's actually from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m.
Right.
So give a lot of analytics which are hitherto could not be given because it's not fundamentally possible, and make sure that the businesses benefit from them and the banks also benefit from them. Like you can learn from the data, like Square does, for example, that 2 months before Thanksgiving, that guy is going to have a working capital issue, right? So why don't we give a loan 2 months before? And he's sure to give that because he's going to buy inventory which is anyways going to be consumed during Thanksgiving.
Correct.
And you can give that at a very high rate, right? Do settlements faster. So today, if a transaction you pay at a restaurant, that money actually comes to the account after 3 days. Why 3 days? Because I have paid the money. The bank is going to sit on it for 3 days. Why not do it on the same day? So things like these can be done in a much faster, more efficient manner.
Right. And that leads to more adoption, obviously, and
absolutely.
It leads to more proliferation of the platform.
Absolutely.
So, I just want to check back with you. When you were talking about legally available data that you can use and kind of expose for different things, what are some of the kinds of data that are generally possible to kind of expose? So, what kind of apps can be built on top of this, right? Can you give us some examples of that so that we can understand what kind of data is generally exposed to third parties?
I would not call them third parties because everyone in a transaction flow has access to that data. Otherwise, you can't do that transaction.
Okay. So who would build these apps then?
So let's take it into two parts, right? Let's say it's a restaurant management app.
Okay.
So when you go into that app, right, it says you had butter chicken, you had Diet Coke, you had beer.
Right.
The same example that I gave earlier, right? Now that is the SKU specific data, right? Which is actually owned by that, let's say, restaurant.
Right.
Because you as
They're
a customer have walked in,
yeah.
right? Now that is 536 rupees. 536 rupees, Pratyush's card and that particular transaction ID has to be known to the bank, otherwise it won't process the transaction.
Right.
So PCI says that part of that data is, all of the data has to be sent in an encrypted manner, but part of the data is visible to the bank once it decrypts it, and part of it is not visible to anyone. It's just verified. Like your PIN, for example, cannot be visible, right? So the part that is visible to the bank is usually your name, Pratyush Prasanna, some part of your card, right, and the transaction ID. So that in case I go back and say that, hey, I didn't do this, I didn't eat this meal, they can say, no, you did. This is what the proof is, right?
Right.
That is what is available. It's actually very minimal data, but powerful data, because now at a bank level, what you can do is you can map that to, especially if you're exposed to the SKU specific data,
Right.
you can map that saying that, hey, Pratyush eats at, Copper Chimney, has coffee at Starbucks, buys Louis Vuitton, whatever. So you can form profiles and then have profiles built which can be used by the bank in order to maybe give you a better loan rate.
Okay. So these would be apps built by banks in this case?
No, the banks could be the apps could be Zomato.
Okay.
Or any other restaurant management app.
Okay.
But the data is shared back with the bank, who's essentially the line which is the payment line,
Right.
is the one that has access to the data.
Okay,
And could
alright,
help
okay,
merchants as well. Like when you walk in and swipe your card, now we know that it is Pratyush coming back to Copper Chimney, second time this month. Why don't we give him a discount?
Right.
So merchant loyalty is something that you can build.
Okay.
Bank offerings is something that you can build.
Okay. So basically anybody in this entire chain can build stuff on top of this, right? Whether it's a restaurant, whether it is the intermediary, whether it is a bank,
Correct.
whether whoever it is, anybody in this chain can build something on
Absolutely.
top to kind of this. Okay.
Yeah.
And if you're outside of this chain and if you want to build like a third party app, which is the magical app that's doing magical things and getting like some kind of creating intelligence for anybody. So is it possible in that kind of scenario? So to, like as you were saying, build a company purely on top of this data?
So some can be, like for example, GST compliance, right?
Right.
Great, because the transaction data goes through. They don't have visibility into the SKUs. They don't have visibility into the card data, but they can still have GST compliance built in, right?
Okay, all right.
As an example, right? However, the data about the transactions is unfortunately very highly restrained in terms of availability to everyone.
Right.
You can slice and dice a lot of it, but generally it is not allowed.
Right.
Who decides that? My question was going to be who decides which.
So payments are quite clearly defined in terms of the availability of data in every country. Like for example, in India, RBI and PCI generally decide what payments data can be available to which player. It's almost very
in the
clear.
same chain who can get which parts.
Absolutely, it's very clearly defined. Unlike consumer data like Facebook and
Where
WhatsApp,
you can do whatever you want to do.
You can do whatever you want.
Right.
Payments data is maybe in a good way, actually very clearly defined, which is why the play is very clean. It's not like, you're going to sell
rules
this
are
data.
good, man. You should know, if you know what your rules are, you can follow the rules or like stretch the rules or whatever, but you need to know what the rules are.
Yeah, so payments generally is very well defined. Like in India, for example, you can't have payment data outside India.
Yes.
Right? So
like
that's
you
very
can't
clearly
store
defined.
it in a cloud outside.
Yeah, and no matter which angle you look at it, it's very clear. You cannot have it. That's it. So, then you do work within those constraints. So.
Right.
On that note, I think we're going to take a quick break, come back and talk some more.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another awesome week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you are not following us on social media, please make sure that you do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We'd like to thank the sponsors on our network, Storytel, Savari, and Paytm Money for their support, and really appreciate it. It's been a busy month in IVM. Last week, we launched 3 new shows. We launched 80KT Talent Tent, we launched Business.Next in partnership with Bloomberg Quint, and we launched Equity Sahi in partnership with Motilal Oswal. And this week, we're going to bring back an old favorite. We're going to come back with the Empowering series after a fairly long hiatus. I hope that you guys enjoy that. Life coach Zarina Poonawalla is joined by our co-founder Kavita Rajwade to discuss how you can put your game face on at your workplace. On Cyrus Says, media pioneer and first-generation entrepreneur Ronnie Screwvala shares his journey with Cyrus, from humble beginnings to small steps in business to going on to establish UTV, RSVP, and more. He also sheds light on his theater days, his parents, and his new podcast, the Ronnie Screwvala Podcast, right here on the IVM network. On Simplified, join Chuck, Naren, and Shrikit simplify the black holes and their importance in this universe. Vishwesh Guttal joins Pawan and Ganesh on Thale Harate, our Kannada podcast, to talk about his life as an associate professor at the Indian Institute of Science in Bengaluru. On the Pragati podcast, V. Ravichandra joins host Pawan to share his experience of working with governments and sheds light on the challenges and constraints faced by government agencies, bureaucrats, and politicians. On Croc Tales, Anna narrates tales on the theme of Avengers Endgame. What would the endgame be in a layman's life? On the Sponge podcast, Ambi Parmeshwaran talks about the importance of demonstrating a greater degree of trust in a client and agency relationship. On IVM Likes, Abbas and Abhineet are joined by the main cast of TVF's new series Kota Factory. They give insights about the show and the inspirations of the writers and actors. On Echoes of India, Anirudh takes us on a tour through the ancient city of Ujjain, walking us through its sights and smells and introducing us to some of its eccentric people. And with that, let's move on with your shows.
All right, welcome back. What's the advantage that you as a platform now provide? I mean, right up front, right? Obviously, we've seen the dumb terminals and they've been around forever.
Correct.
We're seeing this smart terminal. On the consumer side, do I as a person who's walking into a store, do I see anything or experience anything which is better? And how do you provide those things? Or is it all up to the third parties who build it?
No. So as a platform, we provide a lot of interesting options or availability of options. One of the maybe alpha that we are doing is that you actually walk into a store, usually like a government store. This is not in India, but let's say you walk into a government store. We know that this is Shiladitya who's got his ration last month. As soon as you walk in, because we have cameras, so we know that, hey, Shiladitya back to, without even doing any kind of swipe, nothing.
Whoa.
So you walk in and then you're stand in front of the terminal or in front of the cashier. So we know that it is Shiladitya. You confirm, usually by a cell phone OTP or something. And then that's it. The billing happens because you have your card stored.
So like Face ID or like face recognition for instead of pins.
Absolutely.
Basically.
You just stand there, payment done.
Right.
So that's kind of one of the innovations that we are looking at. Similarly, there are a lot of merchant side innovations that are possible.
Obviously.
Right? So making sure that you get the best deal in each of the transactions that you process. Visibility into coupons, offers, etc., which cannot be done. I mean, everybody throws away whatever, paper that you send them.
Right.
So, at one point you can say that, hey, if you pay by your HDFC card, you'll get a 10% more discount, just as an example. So interesting stuff like that is also possible.
Right. What's your take on the India? So now juxtaposing what you said earlier about India being a great place to do payment stuff. How are you seeing that, with Poynt coming in, this changes up the game a little bit? What's your top goal for Poynt as a platform in India, if you may say?
Again, I think I'll give an abstracted out answer. I think the Indian market is now mature for smarter payment devices to come in. Examples of that are Reliance has publicly said through Jio, they want to have merchants empowered. Right?
There's a big push there, and even Paytm, of course.
Paytm, of course, also has always been in empowering merchants, right? And with smart terminals is the way to go. Obviously, they are much bigger entities in that sense. But my belief is that they are going to create the market where people will realize that even for my business, smarter terminals are better. And India, the size of the market is so big that, it's like an Olympic-sized pool with 3 swimmers. 3 or 4 swimmers can swim in this, right? So, I mean, even though, Reliance is definitely the first mover and the biggest one, but still, there is space for a lot more people to swim. To give you an example, China was about maybe 4 million terminals in 2008. China is about 30 million terminals today.
Okay.
So it's like an 8x growth in 10 years, right? I think India is poised at that
you're right.
inflection point.
You see a lot of the normal mom and pop stores right now. You still can't pay by card. You still can't pay through other things. It's all
I was going to come to that. The need for the terminal also comes along with the need for alternate payment methods, because most people, if they just continue to accept cash, all they need is the cash register, right? So it's fundamentally linked to that, you think?
A part of it is linked to the payment behavior, for sure. You can obviously help do a business better even if you're doing 100% cash. But imagine this, right? So, for example, if you take 100% cash and you have used forget about a smart terminal, but no technology as such, you still have to, give tax on it. You still have to do some sort of compliance. Right? Which is a big deal. So
there itself tech can be...
Correct. So there will be some input, so my dad runs a store in Bhubaneswar in Odisha. He's completely shifted to at least like a computer and a printer and potentially a smart terminal at some point, right? There's no way he cannot accept, cards today.
Right.
No way. So that shift is one way, and it is happening. Whether it is completely replace cash, no, but that doesn't need to. It, even if 20% of your users come in and pay by digital methods, you have to do that. And also a big pain remains with the whole reconciliation part, right? 30% of my users pay cash, 20% pay Paytm, 50% pay card, credit card, 2% pay debit card, or whatever, right? So that is a big problem. So that again can be solved smartly by,
having a single platform.
Yeah, having a single platform, whether it is Reliance or
What
Paytm
are
or
the numbers? Can you share some stats on like current market penetration of terminals like this? I mean, in general, I think you've mentioned this, like as a market also we are way behind, like you said, like the China numbers you gave. What are our India numbers?
So India is about maybe 3.5, 3.6 million terminals today.
That's total terminals.
Yeah, active.
Okay.
Active terminals.
Interesting.
So it's very small. As a percentage, it's very as a number, it's very small. Absolute number.
Right.
But and again, by terminals, I'm sorry, I just want to clarify. Right. So by this, you mean terminals which are places where you can accept credit cards, debit cards, or
Correct.
some form of
Correct.
electronic
Correct.
payment. You don't mean point of sale systems.
No,
Right.
I mean payment terminal.
Payment acceptance.
terminals, wherever you can
acceptance
swipe a card.
terminals, Yeah. No. So, but part of what your play is to kind of merge these two things together, right?
Right.
Right.
So a part of our play is to merge all payment forms together into one terminal. It's every smart terminals play.
Okay.
All of them enable it, not only us. So
Okay.
even Reliance will enable it, Paytm will enable it, everyone will enable it, and that's what the game is, right? Where why do you want multiple instances? In terms of other countries,
That's going to be my next.
in terms of other countries, US I think is slightly ahead in terms of the smart terminal market, primarily because of Square. But even then, I think about 5% of that market is smart terminals. Very, very less.
Oh.
It's very small. Yeah. So the globe itself is very small in terms of smart terminal penetration.
Right.
There are a few which are different but ahead, like China, for example. Right? China has so many terminals accepting, and also they accept Alipay and WeChat Cash, right, or WeChat Pay.
Right.
So that's why you could potentially argue that if there is a phone and a terminal, it becomes almost like a smart terminal. It will
Correct.
accept all kinds of payments.
Correct.
So China is slightly ahead in that sense. But if you see the traditional markets where a lot of transactions take place, like the US, Europe, they're still way behind. However, many of the annual reports of European, American, as in South American, North American banks are all focused on smart terminals. They know that this is the way forward. They know that this is the only way that they have alternate sources of revenue, which are different from transaction revenue. And all of them are consistently moving towards it. Like, for example, we partner with this company called Nexi in Italy. Nexi is like the biggest acquirer in Italy, acquirer of merchants in Italy. They're a listed company, so they have said that smart terminals are our future. We'll move to 100% smart terminals in about 3 years. And that's going to be the trend in many of the countries which can afford it or, don't see the capital investment as a short term.
I have a tangential question. How does this go in the face of, and we've had like even last week's episode, we spoke about a little bit about retail and how innovation in retail is a thing, especially in India. In the face of our market, which is sort of catching up with advanced retail stuff like this, alongside of catching up or really succeeding with also e-commerce, how does this really pan out? Like, do you think there is the market is big, we know, but it's so big that there will be people who will still do like walk into a store and pay in a terminal versus just order online versus like how does this the same user, how do you reach him in multiple what do you think is the future of the same user experience in multiple places? Like, is the future all e-commerce or is the future all both in healthy margins?
So I'll look at it in two ways, right? One is, of course, my buying, I'll eat only that much in a month and, my family will eat only that much in a month. So I'll buy it either from Amazon or from the local Kirana store or Big Bazaar or whatever, right? So that's one way to look at it, which is a zero sum in a sense, right? Buying at retail stores, I don't think is going to go away anytime soon. We who live in big cities are pretty much used to getting like Amazon boxes And I'm sure Amazon, Flipkart, and others, and Paytm will do a good job at penetrating into the villages and or A, B, C cities, and addressing what their needs are. But again, buying at retail points is not going to go away anytime soon.
Right.
There is also the other way of happening, which is maybe through a lot of the newer, like Aditya Birla Retail or Future Group or Reliance, which is they are bringing the better retail experiences to grade A, grade B, grade C cities, where you actually have a similar look and feel of a Nilgiris or a Big Bazaar at Cuttack or Balasore or something, right? So those consumers are also getting introduced to newer retail, better experience in retail, and that is growing. That is going to grow much faster than maybe even Amazon or Flipkart are growing. Right. So that's one way. The other way, which is even more futuristic, is that what if you had the capability of knowing that this is Pratyush, he's buying this on Amazon and this at Reliance Retail, and map them saying that this is the same guy, right? Then your potential of knowing what he's going to buy, what he's going to do, right, is much better.
Correct.
Right. So again, I mean, I think the only way that they can be tied is how you pay, right? Which is why Amazon is a much more valuable company than potentially Google, right? Which what you search, but they know what you pay for.
Right.
So so that's how I look at it. That it will again have or turn on the tap of data which you can use to identify users and their needs better.
Right.
And also India is like, especially the cities in the interior, or not the top 6 cities, are growing so fast in terms of consumption that retail is not going to go anywhere anytime soon, is what my belief is.
Right.
No, the people are always going to want to go out, right? Even if it is not necessarily for shopping, there are other things you're going to want to do going outside and spending money on.
Of
doing
course,
things.
of course. I mean, your experiences will upgrade or change to adapt to it. But I agree. I know it's a very forward-looking question. I mean, it was more about maybe comparing with, again, we look at China, the nearest comparison where things are exploding in growth all the time, right? You said the same thing. Well, they are surely buying a lot more online, right? There are... They do their Singles Day and whatnot. Like literally, people are buying everything online and so much online. But they are at the same time exploding on the number of terminals also. So that means they're also buying offline. So
one example in China, now that you mentioned China, is there's a company called Luckin Coffee. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. They're competing with Starbucks now.
Yeah. So they became a unicorn in 1.5 years.
Yeah.
Their simple model was start a coffee chain outside Starbucks, much lesser real estate, much lesser baristas, coffee at about 60 to 70% of the price, because they realized that about 50% of people who walk into Starbucks take away.
Yeah.
So they said, if you want takeaway, come to Luckin. If you want to sit and drink, go to Starbucks. Simple. $1 billion company.
Yeah.
So people will have
I think it's just easier to become a unicorn in China. So
I know.
It's crazy, but
so one of the things that I have anecdotally heard about, like a company like Square, is in the US, a lot of Square usage is with individuals rather than like traditional merchants and stuff like that. Do you think
mom and pop stores?
More than mom and pop stores. Like, I mean, like it'll be like freelancers. It'll be like people who are going to cut your lawn. It'll be like people who are using it for like like
gig economy.
Yeah, very much like for the gig economy kind of stuff. Do you see that as something that, or have you seen any indication of that as being a real use case in a place like India?
So Square started off that way.
Right.
Today, about 95% of Square's usage is actually at point of sale in merchants.
Okay.
That's a great way to build like a trust system where people know that, hey, this payment is not going anywhere; it's coming to me. They also had a great MDR, like 4% of transactions. Nobody else, will give, because as a lawnmower, you don't really mind giving that much, right? But as a business, if you take 4%, you're screwed.
Yeah.
So, so that was a interesting footprint that Square had initially.
Okay.
But they have consistently moved more towards value-added offerings and going to real points of sale like cafes or mom and pop stores, etc. I would assume that 99% of the transactions today would be real businesses,
Okay.
which are like at a particular place.
Okay,
like,
so they are not untethered, basically. That was my question, right?
Yeah,
I mean, like, because a smart terminal seems uniquely suited to being able to, like, just go anywhere and take a payment.
That's right. The other fundamental change that happened was that US completely moved. Well, you can still do mag stripe transactions.
Right.
You can swipe your card, but the general suggestion is to have chip and pin,
Right.
or chip and signature, right? Those dongles that Square had does not support chip. It is only
Right.
mag stripe, right?
Right.
Which is okay for some of the lower value ticket items, but they are consistently moving
Yeah,
towards where more than some dollars you can't do that.
Okay.
So,
Makes sense.
again,
Mag
technicality.
stripe is going away
Mag
worldwide.
stripe is inherently not as secure as chip and pin
Correct.
or NFC, right? So, and also with Google Pay and Apple Pay coming in, a lot of people use Apple Pay. Like NFC usage is increasing a lot for us as well, as we see. I think most of these other forms will also decrease as going forward.
Cool. Thanks. I thought that
Sure.
Yep.
All right. Any parting notes? And of course, tell us about the India story of Poynt. Like, are you expanding? What kind of... are you hiring? Are you any shout out you want to do? Or
Absolutely.
Tell us your Twitter handle. Where can people reach out to you? All the people who are excited about payments after listening to this.
Okay. So my Twitter handle is Pratyush P, Pratyushp. And yes, we are hiring big time for Poynt India. We have a few interesting relationships coming up. I am not at liberty to tell them now, but maybe in a month or so, and which will give us a good amount of footprint in the country. But as I said, super excited for the market itself to be moving, like with Reliance, with Paytm, etc. And I think we not only at Poynt as a company, but India as an economy are nicely poised for growth in terms of newer modes of payment, and we are going to define how this is going to go forward.
Awesome. Thanks so much for doing this. This was awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just a quick reminder, everybody, if you are not subscribed to the Slack channel, please do, ivmpodcast.com/Shunya1. There's a button over there which says subscribe to Slack. Send us your email address, and we will send you an invite. And also a review or a rating wherever you're listening to this. That would be much appreciated.
Absolutely. Thank you, Pratyush. This was awesome.
Thank you for having me here.
Hi, my name is Anupam Gupta. I'm B50 on Twitter. I am the host of Paisa Vaisa, the show that talks money. On my show, I speak to experts from every field of money and finance, from stock markets, equities, debt funds, credit cards, life insurance, every possible area of money and finance that you can think of. We even did an episode on cryptocurrency. I've got fantastic guests from mutual funds to personal finance experts everywhere. Robo-advisory, startups, just name it, we've got it. At Paisa Vaisa, we help you make smart decisions about money. You work hard for money. Now make your money work hard for you. New episodes out every Monday, and you can listen to my show on the IVM Podcast app or any other podcasting app that you have. Paisa Vaisa is brought to you by Paytm Money.
The most engaging and the most useful conversations you may have in your life are likely to be with your most challenging customers. Hi, I'm Ambi Parmeshwaran, and on this podcast, I will take you through my book, Sponge Leadership Lessons I Learned from My Clients. Packed with real stories about real people, but most of all, packed with the innumerable lessons I soaked up from some of the most iconic business leaders like Ratan Tata, Azim Premji, S. Ramadurai, Karsanbhai Patel, M. Damodaran, Dr. Kurian, and many more. Don't forget to tune into the Sponge podcast. Keep sponging to keep learning.